Good day, everybody, and welcome to our interview with the Sunday Community Skirmish 200 winners. That loud noise you hear in the background is Eric, who is working diligently in the office. He's going to be joining us here today as well. Dimencio and Mighty Cab are the
I'm
pilots.
Daniel.
Yes.
Hi.
Wait. All right. Who's Dimencio? I forgot about that. Nobody knows who Dimencio is. No, Daniel and Mighty Cab are joining us here today. They are the captains for the winning team, Glow Rider Falls, correct?
Yes.
Perfect. And let's first off let's talk about Sunday Community Skirmish number 200, and let's talk about a little bit about what transpired, especially in your match with Muse, because apparently I believe y'all took on Muse earlier in the tournament, correct?
Well, this might sound insulting, but I don't even remember what happened by then.
Harsh.
Harsh. Wow. Okay. There you go. Listen,
I think it went by really fast and it was a 5-0, but that's all I know.
Yeah, there were a lot of
Might-
5-0s in that SCS.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, shots fired. We're not even a minute into the interview, right?
It's like Muse who?
Ooh, wow. Okay. Well, let's move.
I like. I remember Arctic was in the enemy team, and because it's technically part of the riders, I told him to switch to clan like before the match started. Which the rider wins.
Oh my
What
goodness.
map was it again? Do you remember that map?
Yeah, it might have been Canyons.
Was it Canyons?
Canyons. Canyons is a good map. It's definitely one of my favorite maps in
Yeah, but
competitive play.
was it the map that we played against Muse?
Oh, I actually don't remember off the top of my head, truth be told.
Oh, you don't remember either? Huh?
No, well, no, because I actually was not casting that one, if memory serves me.
How
correct.
long has it been since SCS 200? Like 4 weeks?
It's been a few weeks. Yeah, it's been a few weeks.
Yeah, I mean, this was supposed to happen like right after that, so I don't think I can blame anyone for not remembering it. Anything.
Oh my goodness, yeah, but that's okay. I mean, you know, we got you on camera now. All the schedules lined up, so it's
All
good
the
to have y'all
pressure.
here. I'm sorry.
All the pressure is on us
Yeah,
right now.
that's okay.
Millions
That's okay.
of people watching.
Oh
I don't
man,
know what to do.
millions around the world, right?
You don't even know. One day Goyo will come back from the dead, and like there'll be million views on every video.
And they're like,
The
who are
Koreans
these
will
girls?
dominate the competitive scene,
There you
and
go.
that'll be a very sad time.
So let's talk about your time in the competitive scene. Let's talk about when each of you first started out in Sunday Community Skirmish or any competitive scene, and how people might be able to get into the competitive scene here today. Maybe if they're just starting out, or maybe if they're a PlayStation user, or maybe if they're just looking to get on a team in and of itself. Like, how did y'all get started?
Well, I
Really
played the
start
game.
with- Well, yeah, that's basically it. But if you could just stop at that, we wouldn't have to do this interview thing.
We
Mhm.
don't have to do it. Well,
Look,
it's
you have to frame it like a story and pretend it's like autobiography of someone who's about to die.
Wait.
You'll have a biography at the ready if you need to. Well, how it all
It
happened.
all started when no, but I mean, like seriously, when like it's y'all have been in SCS. Gosh, I know Dementia, you've been around for like at least over 100 SCSs, right? Both of you have been.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I started in 2015. I started playing in autumn 2014. And I got into competitive in I think June or yeah, end of June in 2015. Before that, I had been interested in competitive for a while. For a couple of months, I'd been watching the matches. And this one time, I found Mickey, and I noticed that he's a player in Guns of Icarus, and I noticed that he was in this weird, unusual clan called TPR, and I saw the words competitive in the clan description. So I thought I'd ask him if I could sub for their team in a couple of games, see what it was like, because I did want to get into it. And from then on, I sort of expressed interest in piloting, and they gave me a chance, and I went on to pilot. And then after a while, I became their only pilot because the clan kind of died out after that.
Yeah, TPR Team Predator, correct?
Yep.
Yeah, and I think they had the offshoot of Predator Island as well, correct, Keb?
That was with Sunstrom. That was around the time when a bunch of people started going inactive in our team for various reasons, and we couldn't get them back. So we were stuck with like 3 or 4 people.
Yeah, and that happens. Different ships will come together, and one of the things I've noticed with competitive is that like the teams may change, but the ships seem to stay relatively the same.
What do you mean?
Especially like say pilots have their preferred crews and whatnot. Maybe one person swaps out here or there. But like say like Dementio, you told me
Oh,
if
you
I'm
mean the
wrong.
crew?
Yeah, your
Yeah.
crew.
No, I've had the same crew member since the very first time I piloted. Well,
Yeah.
except they're gonna change twice. But we don't talk about that.
How many times have you fired Jarman?
Yeah.
No,
So someone
seriously.
tell him to come with the balloon, please.
Oh, okay.
He's always on fire. He's always on
He's
fire.
always on fire.
Always
Yeah,
on fire. He's a
publicly
good
embarrassing in front of like all those 10 people that are listening to this.
person. Yeah.
Oh, come on
Oh,
now.
they know. They saw the balloon being on fire. They know.
But let's shift subjects a little bit to
No, I didn't
the
even tell you my story.
Oh yeah, keep going then. Keep going.
Oh no, my story.
Yeah.
So it all started back when Archiel, our clan founder, made the clan. You know, the Wind Riders it was called back then. Back
Mhm.
then we had no clan system. And he had this. I don't know how he found this group, but he found like 7 other players to form the clan with. And they just joined competitive right away, so it was really into that. And this was now the riders in general began in competitive, like with the clan founder, if they went immediately into competitive and played every week in it.
Wait, when did they actually start? What was the year they started in?
Uh, I don't actually know. It must have been on release even because no Archel has been
Oh,
like
okay.
Archel was being gone inactive around the time I joined competitive, so he is super old.
See, that explains a lot of the like pretty much the entirety of the Storm Rider dominance that used to be a thing like until the past 2 years. So I thought they were just a clan that came out of nowhere and owned everyone, but well, it makes a lot more sense that they were around since the beginning.
Yeah, our clan in general was around since the beginning. Yeah, we weren't dominating since the beginning. Back then it was the Gens, the Ducks, the Sils Merriman. All those fun like Crows, which eventually became Thralls, which eventually became Team Predators, and came back to the Thralls.
Yeah.
Fun fact.
It's all come full
And,
circle now.
yeah. Eventually, Achilles' ally became inactive, and it was just a general bunch of the old riders became inactive in the game. So Chiu, Armar, and Tilton had to get a bunch of new people to invite to the clan, but they weren't still enough to make a full team. So they already back then formed like an alliance with another team, which was Lurosis ship,
Mhm.
the clan, and that's how the Storm Riders were made. Like Hilton and Geo made when they made the Riders, they became the Storm Riders to preserve the Wind Rider name to Archiel and his ally Captain Oakbit. And the Storm Riders, that's when around the time I came around to play Guns of Icarus in general. I saw them in the pub lobbies every time, stomping everyone. Good old Halo stacks.
Yeah.
And Gio actually joined the game the same time I did. He was just more interested in competitive, so he found the Archel and his team really quickly. But I played with him in pub matches and the novice matches. Every time I needed a gunner, Gio was always around. And he gunned for my ship back then. And eventually he invited me and Thomas, which is called Exterminating Game, to the clan. And that's how we became affiliated with the clan just through playing randomly with Gio.
Yeah. So
And one time there was the aerodrome, and that's the first time like a competitive Crazy King tournament, and that's the first that they needed a substitute for one of the ships, and that's the first time I came around to competitive, and eventually I'd shown the SES to sub-pilot a few times, and then one time I had Hilton then left, became inactive himself because of something important, and I basically stole his spot and became the new pilot with Exterminator being my main engineer. and the Jarman and Jew/Alien / Jake are the gunners of my ship since then.
So what I'm hearing you say here is that one of the most important factors to getting into competitive would definitely be to network with say the veterans of the community, to get to know them, to work, to crew for them,
Yeah.
things like that, right?
No, yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
definitely. Like Jake, my current gunner, he is relatively new compared to most riders. That's what he did. He came online and played with our teammates, clanmates, and eventually he applied to our clan because we already knew him. We just let him in, and eventually spots came open, which eventually it always will be an open spot. And since then, he's been on the ship in competitive.
There you go. So
yeah, asking other teams if you could play as a substitute player is also nice, because like if they'll probably call on you if someone goes missing last minute, and you'll get to play with them without having to commit to their clan. So like in case anything goes wrong, you don't have to stick with them that you don't
absolutely.
like.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I wasn't going to say anything. That was
Oh,
it.
okay.
No.
So let's switch back to the more recent topics, specifically that of the Stormbreaker within the game, especially in the competitive scene. Stormbreaker is a ship that is currently, shall we say, has gained a reputation. I'll use the mild phrase there. It has gained
It's
a
pretty good.
reputation. Yeah, it's pretty good. I mean, it might be okay. But tell me about, and this is where we'll bring Eric into the equation here. Let's talk about how Stormbreaker has been performing in the game. First off, from a more competitive perspective, starting with Dementia and Keb, and then shifting over to Eric,
And
and
then
how his perspective of the Stormbreaker is.
so the
Well,
Storm Rider, I mean the Stormbreaker.
Especially the
It's
Watcher Breaker. Yeah, the Watcher Breaker especially.
the Stormbreaker. If you look at the guns, it has like 3 light guns and 1 heavy gun, right?
Yep.
And if you look at other ships in the game that you see the Spire, which has 3 light guns
Yeah.
and 1 heavy gun, and you know the Spire is really strong if it gets its guns towards its targets. So you know a
Yeah.
ship that's faster and more difficult to hit with the
Yeah,
same gun
and
setup. It's also
easier to
really,
easier
really
to
strong.
get like in the killing position with.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
The Stormbreaker is basically a Spire aimed towards that choose towards assigned, but it can
Yeah.
reposition so quickly and dodge and weave all around.
Yeah, just do everything Spire can't while doing everything Spire can.
Yeah, the only downside to it, of course, is it's very light, and it's probably one of the weakest ships in terms of armor and permahull, if I remember correctly. So there is an offset. Of course, the trick is you got to hit it in order to damage it.
That might be why,
Yeah.
like, somewhat why it struggles in lower level matches.
Mhm.
Simply because it's
Yeah.
the pilots, like, me, Cab and me have years of pilot experience in competitive. If you're just a new player in the game and then you're a pilot and you fly the Stormbreaker, you'll struggle because you don't have that experience of what the enemy is going to do. You don't know what your
Yeah.
crew needs to do. You don't know what the enemy crew is going to do to you, and you just don't quite understand yet the flow of the gameplay. So if you're a vulnerable ship without that experience, it's likely you're going to get shot before you manage to
Yeah,
dodge.
its strength is that it gives you an insane amount of control over pretty much everything you do because of mobility. But if you don't know what to do with that control, you're not very successful.
Yeah, let's bring.
Guns of Icarus is very much about anticipating, like piloting. Guns of Icarus is very much about
Yeah.
anticipating the enemy movement.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Only experience will give you that anticipation.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
And that's not just pilots as well. It's also crew members, gunners lining up shots, engineers being in the right place at the right time, anticipating certain damage coming in, like say preparing for hull breaks and being there before the hull even breaks. Or Hwacha, you've got the timing of the Hwacha down. It's like, okay, I'm already at the engines, ready to go. That sort of stuff.
Like half of my relevant experience flying Squid was through barreling it into Daniel's Mobula in like 2015 and having him dodge it every time and outplay me.
Good
And
old
at the
Mobula.
time it was like painful, and it felt like Marbula was OP, but now I just know how to fly, so it's not
Well,
so much of trouble.
since then the Maple has been nerfed. So back then it was OP.
Yeah, it
Now
has
it's
it
just
has the
really good.
verticals back. It nearly has the old vertical stats back. I think with
Almost.
this patch. Yeah, they buffed it up to from 6 to 6.5 to 7. The old one was 7.5.
Yeah. I think there were some other changes that affected Maple that
Yeah.
didn't move it fully.
I mean, the stats
But
are always
yes,
being tweaked a little bit here and there. And speaking of which, let's bring Eric in at this point and get his opinion on where Stormbreaker is, especially with Sunday Community Skirmish's recent decision to banish the Watchabreaker. If I remember correctly, the Watchabreaker is the only Stormbreaker that's been
Yeah.
banned. But yeah, let's bring Eric in and talk about the Stormbreaker as a whole at this point and where it stands in the game.
So, as everyone knows, the Stormbreaker started out in PvE, right? It was a PvE only ship. And even then, when we were designing the ship and testing it initially, like even before we released the Yesha and Arashi content, the ship was already experiencing problems. I think a lot of the things that the issues that revolve around the ship are compounding issues. Part of it is the maneuverability. Part of it is the number of arcs that you can get, the ease of getting those arcs. Another unexpected compounding factor is that the hitboxes for those guns actually end up protecting the ship a lot more than they should. So there are a couple of all these things that have stacked up on the ship that has made it fairly troublesome to deal with. In PvE, it's generally fine. Like I don't really, if it's overpowered, it's a very powerful ship and hard to use in PvE. That's okay because you're not playing against another human, right? That kind of power fantasy is acceptable in that setting. You go ahead and be really powerful and go ahead and kill, 20, 30 enemies at any given time and fly around the map like crazy. But in the PvP setting, that formula changes up drastically, and we have to consider all these various factors that have been compounding over time. And only until recently that we're starting to realize some of these issues and trying to address them. One interesting thing that was not considered, so most of the process now about balance changes actually comes from the experimental crew first, and then is proposed to me. The experimental crew, when proposing and testing out the Stormbreaker, they actually did not recommend very many maneuverability related changes. So what's possible, and I can't remember off the top of my head if we actually do any of this, but the balance between ships between PvE and PvP can be different. They can have different maneuverabilities. They can have different, I believe, hull and armor, etc. So we have that complete flexibility. They like, for example, a goldfish in PvE could be totally different from a goldfish in PvP, right? If we so choose to do that. The one downside is like it's confusing to a player. It's like, why is this different? This is the same damn ship I'm on, right? Mm-hmm. So now we're at this point where people are worried about the changes that have made it to production right now. So we're doing this like Stormbreaker like test trial event for I believe the next 2 weeks where people can try out the major changes. So the most contested change is moving that light gun to the front right side of the ship. So that will drastically change how the Stormbreaker is going to be used. My thought is, yes, it will probably diminish its capabilities and competitive right off the bat because you don't have those arcs anymore.
And you don't have an easy access gun on the front too.
Right, precisely. trying to think of how that would affect regular players. It's a little, that's more unclear, because I think a lot of, and everyone else is right about the reasons why it's more difficult for new players to get a grasp of the Stormbreaker is because it is so weird with its maneuverability. It is very hard to get in position to do just about anything. So we'll see. I'm looking forward to the feedback, but you know, I think an interesting thing that we could do in the future, in future tests, or hopefully making it back into production, is like maybe we should just look at the maneuverability again. Maybe something needs to be done there. The maneuverability now is too hard for new players, and it's probably the most powerful aspect about it in competitive. You can just get in and out and deal a ton of damage. Well, what happens if it's a little bit harder to do that? Who knows?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to
Yeah,
see. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I also personally dislike the maneuverability changes because the at least the nerfs that happened 1 or 2 patches ago, where it was basically halved, because it hasn't really changed the effectiveness of Stormbreaker, but it affected the Stormbreaker matchups in a way that's just less exciting overall. Like pilots have, if both Stormbreaker pilots get up close to each other, they both have more reaction time to anticipate each other's moves. So there's like less unpredictability there, and it's just much more safer to. It's much more reliable at this point to sit at max watcher range and hope RNG favors you.
Yeah, I mean, the only problem with that mindset is that you're only looking at a very specific case against Stormbreaker versus Stormbreaker.
Yeah, of course. Just
You know,
looking really deeply at that because it's what I experienced a lot on competitive before the bans.
sure, sure. I mean, I think again, like a lot of with competitive, with the PvP side of things, every change needs to be handled holistically. So I think the maneuverability nerfs for the Stormbreaker, I was surprised they didn't happen sooner. But I think they are definitely appropriate, and it brings it more in line. If we need to nerf that further, I don't know. Again, like it causes those differences between PvE and PvP, and that the Stormbreaker is now like 2 very different ships. Generally, I don't like that, but we'll just have to play it by ear and try, as many different axes as possible to make sure that the Stormbreaker doesn't need to experience these kinds of bans, or doesn't experience like, oh, it's just the most OP ship in high-level play, period.
The large problem is that it's so fast and has all that firepower. Yet, because it has both of those things, it needs to be so vulnerable and tiny. If it was a bigger ship,
But
it
at the same
wouldn't need
time,
to be so fast. It could be slower and still do the same damage.
Let me piggyback off that statement real quick and ask a question here of both Dementio and Mighty Keb. Would you say that the biggest weapon within the competitive scene would not necessarily be the weapons, but instead be the maneuverability of ships, at least in the current meta?
it kind of depends on, like, I don't like to use the word meta because there aren't enough teams in this game to call anything meta in particular, because meta is like, a bunch of people do something and it ripples to all the rest, but there's no all the rest to speak of for it to ripple to.
Let
So,
me rephrase
but
the
among the
question then.
teams,
Oh, sorry.
uh,
Go ahead.
it depends on like how the game is played, whether it's snipey or brawly. I think with Stormbreaker, like it ushered in a meta, quote unquote, where maneuverability was really important, because if you weren't maneuverable, the other ships are just gonna get on your sides and double team you. So you could only like run maybe Goldfish or something like that. Like Stormbreaker meta in general was extremely limiting. If you weren't a Stormbreaker or Goldfish, not only did you have a bad 1v1 matchup against both of those ships, but you also couldn't move around and juke them or survive even.
Yeah, and hopefully we will see we will see something in which and would you
I
say? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I guess to answer your
Mhm.
question, it will still be important as it always was, but there might be less incentive for it now that there's less incentive to take a Stormbreaker counter.
Okay. Let's switch to the other side of the spectrum then. Perhaps some of the ships that we don't see in PvP as often, or at least ships that we don't see in competitive as often,
Okay.
and get your opinions on those. Let's start with something that I remember back when it was first introduced, everybody was raving over, and then just as quickly fell out of favor. The Magnate, aka the Big Fluffy Balloon.
Well,
It's easy to hit.
yeah, that's basically it. It's easy to hit and it's not that tanky. And it's not that fast either.
Yeah,
All it has going for it is that it's a broadside ship with Spire Trifecta. But then it's a broadside ship, so like it's either used for sniping or it's just well, or it can't really chase kills otherwise.
The
And well,
magnet.
there haven't been many like snipey choices lately up until the Stormbreaker ban because you couldn't snipe against the Stormbreaker.
yeah,
Yeah, the
and
Stormbreaker made it more vulnerable, but this is also the Judgment, which has easier gun logs. Like it can get your quad factor, and is
Yeah,
much more tanky than the Magnet.
yeah. There's also that.
yeah,
And I believe the Crusader is also a little bit tankier. And but for me, the bigger problem with the Magnet is its difficulty to maintain for the crew. Like you have the armor on the front, two guns, and then every other component on the back of the ship. And most magnet setups have to have an engineer on the armor. Like most ships have an engineer on the armor for the mallet.
mm-hmm.
And if you run a gunner, that already gives you the trouble of one engineer is left on the back, and that engineer has to repair all three engines and the balloon, and has to chem spray over fire extinguisher the gunner's gun somehow. So he's already doing like up four or eight components in total the engineer is fixing on his own. And
Yeah,
that
and
becomes
it's
very difficult when you want to shoot. You're like you're not a tanky ship. Your armor engineer can't shoot forever. He always has to go back to repair. Your engineer on the back has to always repair because there's too many components. And heavy guns are easy to destroy. So and like the Artemis is definitely a very huge part of competitive. So if you have a heavy gun that gets destroyed, your gunner will be busy repairing it for a lot of time.
so what I'm
Just
hearing here is that it's a sniping ship with that does not fit into the role because it's way too easy to hit.
and I would also say too difficult to repair.
Too difficult to repair. Okay.
I also think some of it has to do with like I think at this point a large part of it has to do with judgment overshadowing
Uh-oh.
Oh, we're losing Cam.
Uh-oh, we're losing
most
Cab.
Cap,
Man
no.
down.
other
Oh no, Cap.
Man down. Uh-oh.
sniping. Testing again.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, you're good.
Okay. I almost got killed by Stormbreaker, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I think a large part of Magnate's unviability is just a consequence of judgment overshadowing most sniping ships. Like, without it, if you added some small buffs to Magnate, it would probably still be played. But there's really no reason to play it at the moment.
Mhm.
It's just these two alliance ships, Judgment and Stormbreaker, have power creeped a lot of other options in the past few months.
Yeah, plus the Goldfish has always had a place in competitive. Um, those three ships seem to be dominating play along with, of course, your standard Mobula from teams like, say, Skyborn, things like that. The occasional Galleon, but the Galleons are even falling out of favor with the Judgment, from what I've seen.
Well, yes, that's it. That's really the center of the problem with Galleon 2.
Yeah, so
Like, it's
let's.
not a bad ship, it's just not good enough. Like,
Yeah.
it used to be favored because it was the only sniping platform that could take a trifecta involving a lumberjack. No other ship could do that except Spire, but Spire was so easy to hit. Well, whilst Galleon was more durable. But now, like, the Judgment just like it does. Like Galleon has other things going for it that it does slightly better than Judgment,
Mhm.
but Judgment is like pretty much made to outclass Galleon in just the sniping alone, and that is the only thing the competitive team's value, so it's taken a lot more than Galleon.
Let's bring Eric back into this at this point with this magnate discussion, and also bring him in regards to one of my favorite ships as well, the Shrike. But then again, I definitely favor it more in PVE and pub play. But let's kind of talk about kind of the challenges with some of these alliance ships that have been brought into, or at least the PVE ships that have been brought into PvP. And how balance has changed since they've been brought into PvP, especially the Magnate and the Shrike, as they're two ships that seem to be kind of on the back end of people's minds when it comes to high level play.
Right. Just like a overall general note, seeing these shakeups and ships rotating in and out based on changes, that's all expected. It's not going to be perfect the first time it hits the ground. There's going to be these issues where things are going to be power creeping, things are going to fall to the wayside. But this is how we react. Then we question, okay, do we need to bring these ships back into the fold? Are there enough choices for competitive play? If they're not, then of course, then we should start evaluating, do we need to nerf something to make other choices more attractive, or do we want to make the less attractive favored again with a buff of some sort? I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but I believe there were some nerfs involving the Magnate a patch or two ago that probably did its part to put it in the back of people's minds and competitive right now.
Its turning was nerfed. When it released, it had 650
Right.
armor and it had pretty good turning. And then its both armor and turning was nerfed. And then I think in a couple of patches ago, its armor was buffed back up to where it used to be, but the turning stats were changed so that the turning speed was a lot higher than the acceleration, so it became a lot clumsier. It got more acceleration than top speed, but it didn't do much because I don't think it's very important for Magnate to have those stats.
Right, sure. So I mean, again, like the changes that have been made are being made across PvE and PvP. I think generally for at least the Magnate, it's fine for those changes to be happening. But again, this is an avenue that we can take if there are some more extreme or unique changes that we need to make. Like let's say the PvP version of the Magnate, the hull and armor, it's a lot stronger than it is in PvE. Those kinds of changes that don't change the feel or maneuverability of the ship, I think are a little bit more acceptable because like the health is a little bit, it's happening in the background, right? It's not affecting your second to second gameplay while you're a pilot. So I'm definitely willing to entertain those kinds of changes if they are necessary. The other thing I want to say is like, again, all these changes come up from the experimental crew. I would highly recommend that if competitive players are seeing problems arise in their play and they see strategies or a pattern that is emerging, definitely get involved with the experimental crew. At least let someone know who's a part of it, or take part yourselves. I mean, this is the great part of the community. We definitely want to invite that kind of involvement, and really you guys have the say in what direction the game is going to go in.
Yeah, I personally I've been very involved with some of the changes that were made to the Spire a couple of months ago, where its balloon hitbox became entirely balloon instead of balloon mixed with hull.
Yeah, so if you don't like the Spire, blame Cap.
Yeah, blame me.
Sorry.
And of course, to add on to that, if you cannot make the times when the experimental crew is going on, you can always send an email to feedback@musegames.com, and we'll be more than happy to review any suggestions that anybody has. On that note, let me bring in any ships maybe Dementia and Mighty Keb, that you two think
Pandemic.
should? Oh yeah, who is Dementia? That's right. Uh, let's. What about certain ships that you think are in desperate need of a, as opposed to a look to nerf such as the Stormbreaker, perhaps a desperate need to buff up, much like the Magnet we talked about earlier. What
So we
ship?
were gonna talk about Shrike in addition to Marinate. We didn't finish that, and it's probably a good opportunity to talk about it.
Okay.
It's I don't want to buff it because it was already buffed a couple of months ago, like out of all the complaints that came in its direction. I just think I think Shrike needs something more fundamental as far as changes go. So I think it's like badly designed for PvP from the ground up. It's one heavy gun, one light gun ship. That's the bifecta it gets, which is the probably the least efficient uh, weapon combo for actually killing things. It's okay for disabling, but it's just like you can't bring an explosive gun on the heavy gun slots because heavy flaks are unreliable, and you don't have a piercing weapon. Like all the reliable explosive weapons are on the light gun slot, but there is no piercing heavy weapon. So you end up having to take a disabling weapon for heavy gun slots and play as a disabled ship. Except as a Shrike, you're side facing and like people can fire at you and disable you before you reach your destination and turn your guns to fire at them.
Now,
And that's
granted.
really just
Yep. Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
makes
Go
things
ahead.
difficult for it.
Yeah, I was
It
gonna
just
say, just kind of when you're talking about the light flax. I mean, I know this is kind of where you and I get into a little bit of a difference of opinion, because in PVE the Shrike is a much better ship than it is in PvP. I agree with you
yeah,
in PvP. It is definitely towards the bottom of the pecking order.
yeah, it's probably good in PV. It's probably good in PVE. I feel like Eric mentioned something about the power fantasy earlier when he was discussing Stormbreaker design philosophy. I feel like if that was like if that was a little less present compared to its implications for PvP from the very beginning when designing ships, I feel like we wouldn't be in the situation we are now. I think things might have gone slightly better, like
An
with
important,
balance.
an
Well,
important thing with the land ships is that all of them have a heavy gun, and that heavy gun kind
That's
of breaks the synergy.
yeah. That's also like it kind of sucks. Like
There
it
might be a
makes
problem that we don't have enough different heavy guns in the game right now, so
yeah, and
this
at the
would make
same
it
time,
helpful.
the existing heavy guns that are good are basically taking the meta by the testicles. Because like it's just if you don't have a like there's so many ships with heavy guns at the moment that if your ship doesn't have a heavy gun, like you're gonna have a hard time because you can't compete. It's one part of the power creep that was introduced with alliance ships.
Yeah, if I can butt in here. So, we've been talking about ships for the entire conversation, but I think especially with the Shrike issue is that the other side of the conversation is guns, right? We're starting to talk about that, um, right? The Shrike is a ship. All the PvE ships were made for PvE, and
Yeah,
considering what new guns were going to be added in PvE, it's until later, you know, that we're like, oh, I think we need to make these available in PvP, and it's like, oh, well, it's too late to change anything now. So that's just the situation that we got ourselves into, and we have to deal
so
with it, right?
so there was like how do I say it? No like goal for bringing those ships into PvP when they were being designed.
It was initially not considered,
Okay.
and
Yeah, that's fine.
due to a top-down decision, they were we needed to bring them in. So
Mm.
that's just how it went. There's no excuse around that. So again, it's just we have to figure out ways to um, try to make those patches and differences. Like again, we can make a different version of PvE and PvP ships so they behave differently. But again, back to guns, right? Right, piercing weapons is really important for the Shrike to get those bifectas, just being effective, period. Way back near the launch of the game in 2012, we had the field gun, and that was actually a very big problem for us, where it was very powerful. It was the #1 armor stripping weapon in the game, topping the Gatling. Yeah, so basically people would be playing on dunes. They'll just be playing near their spawn points and just sniping each other across the map with field guns and maybe a light flak, usually heavy flak.
There's recordings of competitive matches in the community esports channel of people doing just that. It's
Exactly.
to watch.
Yeah.
So that was a type of play that we didn't feel like expressed like what is cool about the game. Nothing is fun about just sniper war halfway across the map and not moving around, right? It's not very fun to play. It's not fun to watch. So we need to change that formula up, and that's why the field gun is very different from what it was. There are some other so field gun, not very good, not very effective. Do many people even use that gun nowadays? I don't think so.
Yeah, it depends. Like I've noticed it in more disable. Like say if you're running a Mobula and you're looking to disable, say, a galleon or a slower moving ship, Mercury still sees play.
It's pretty niche.
It has a role in the place, and it at least does it well enough to justify bringing it, which is fine, I think.
Yeah, and again, that's part of the accessibility of the gun. Because of those initial issues, it is a very hard gun to use in general now to be effective. So that might be also part of the problem for that specific weapon. Other piercing weapons, of course, is a Gatling with Go-To, right? The Hades was also meant to be a piercing weapon through its fire capabilities. But again, it's a harder gun to use. It arcs a lot. The projectiles are relatively slow, and the armor DPS is, all those factors compounded, is just lower than everything else available. So light gun, piercing options are limited to the Gatling, basically. If you want to outdamage a dedicated engineer on the hull. Because of what we learned from the field gun, we're still very hesitant on adding a heavy piercing gun. It's in PvE. It's a cavitation gun. Wait, is that actually what it's called in production?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, good. In my head, I always go by our experimental names. Okay, so cavitation gun is in PvE right now. That is the heavy piercing gun. I suspect if we put it in PvP, it will cause a lot of problems. Very much like the field gun issues that we had near the launch of the game. I could be wrong. This could be a good candidate for like a Mark skirmish version of the gun with, pretty different balance to make it fit somewhere and make ships like the Shrike do a little bit better.
Well, you do have a heavy piercing gun, though. We have the Minotaur in PvP.
That's right.
Don't encourage people to use that gun. Don't encourage anyone to use Minotaur. Yeah, but I think one problem with the heavy guns is that it needs to make them feel worth the title of a heavy gun. Like the heavy flag guns are twice as powerful as a light flag gun. The Hawacha is and from
it's
the
like
start,
Artemis,
it's an Artemis, yeah. But it has to be that
Artemis,
extremely
someone
much more
decided
stronger.
to overdo it.
I'm glad y'all bring up the Hwacha with the heavy guns because I since we're on the topic of guns, would you say that Hwacha is the most prevalent and most useful by far, like say far outclassing all the other heavy guns, other than maybe say long range lumberjack and heavy flak combo?
In brawling, it competes only in brawling. It only has one other gun to compete with, and that's the
Heavy Carra.
Carronade. Because its job is to disable, and the heavy Carronades job is to disable. Which, by the way, it's also twice as good as the light carry.
They do it in different ways. Where Watcher is better at immediately, winning immediately getting the advantage. Where Terror is more, it takes a little while to take effect, but its effect is stronger
Much for a
overall.
long time, yeah.
Yeah. But it's very prevalent on most ships in the game right now because it's just because
Those two
most ships in the
guns,
game have heavy guns.
those two
And
guns are, by the way, also very easy to use. Like it's
Yeah.
very difficult in close range to be bad with the Watcher because it's just you shoot a bunch of rockets at a ship that's really close to you. You're not going to miss a lot.
Yeah.
And only if you, it's also the other side of the Watcher is if you keep spamming it and you have a Gatling to pair it up with or any other sort of harassing gun, you will eventually end up you keep disabling the enemy components over and over again with each Watcher reload. And then you end up breaking the armor, and the Watcher's explosive damage makes sure that the ship dies very quickly too. So the Watcher has the other side of it kills on top of that.
It's just a very convenient gun given the circumstances we're in, which is a lot of ships with a lot of heavy gun slots. That not all of them can bother to bring a heavy carronade. It's just much easier to do with Watcher.
That's interesting because in my mind, I feel like the quantity of heavy gun slots doesn't really matter too much because historically we've been on the other end of that spectrum, like the Karen. So we had the carronade and the Watcher there in the game at the same time, but carronade was highly favored. People like we were there's a huge problem, like both carronade, light and heavy. They were just like everyone just into balloon popping for those like couple of months. Then I can't remember if it started off with the Watcher being OP, but I do remember that there were a bunch of changes to like I think it got nerfed, meaning the spread was really high on it, and then that got the spread was reduced after that. Always a back and forth with the Watcher to try to get it in the right place. So it seems like maybe the Watcher still needs a little bit of work if it is being so commonly used like that.
I mean, it's already gone through like so many nerfs up to this day that I'm not sure if it can take one more. Because I remember like old Watcher used to be like it had more projectile speed and tighter spread, old being the 2015 Watcher to 2016.
For what the Watcher does, that it doesn't matter what you do to nerf it. It's very much likely that the ship will still bring the Watcher because as Kev said, it's a very convenient gun. You can't.
Yeah, as long as it does what it does, it's useful.
It's because it disables in close range very well. The guns, like as I said before, heavy gun takes a long time to rebuild for a normal gun with a pipe range. It just takes so long. And the Watcher, it has the advantage of stopping getting destroyed by destroying the enemy guns. So it already lives longer than every other heavy gun, in that sense. And as I said, it kills very well when the armor breaks. So it's the only gun that stays alive. The heavy gun stays alive, and it's also the only reliable heavy gun that kills. It has explosive damage in close range. And it has no contender for these 2 points. And because it has no contender, it means it will always be used very often, no matter what you do.
I mean, I guess a possible response to that is we talk about ships, we talk about guns. Now we're introducing the angle of repairability, or how long are things, killed off for. What is also available is per component type modifiers on how effective rebuild is. So if we wanted to, overall, we can make balloons, for example, easier to rebuild. We could do that. Now, this might be too much of a specific case for this to be used on, but let's say, things get disabled, guns get disabled way too frequently in PvP, then we could either reduce the frequency of things getting disabled. That means reducing the damage or increasing the health of components, or we can make it faster to rebuild these components.
I'm kind of thinking that it would be more interesting to increase the speed of rebuilding the components as opposed to decreasing the effectiveness of a weapon, because you want to still reward somebody for making an effective play, but at the same time, let's say, if going back to what y'all said earlier about, the Hwacha can't take one more nerf, it might be devastating for that weapon. Well, what if instead of it being like, oh, you need X amount to rebuild a gun or X amount to repair an engine, I think it's like eight. It's like eight spanners to rebuild a light engine, and then I think it's 12 for a heavy. What if those were reduced to say 6 and 9? Or what if guns were took 2 less spanner hits to rebuild, or things like that? Just minor quality of life changes.
I think the ultimate solution would be to, have the gunner's skill directly affect how much disables you get in a significant way, as like how heavy clip on Hwacha used to be years ago when it provided perfect jitter, where like it still does it now, but because the projectile speed is much slower, it's not reliable at all. I feel like I'd like to see the projectile speed returned and like the jitter increased a little bit, like how it used to be, because it used to have less jitter, so using burst was not very reliable unless you were really close. But most people use heavy clip in the watch as a rule, and if you could hit with it, it was actually pretty decent. I would like to see something like to that effect, even if we can't have exactly that. Because then not every person who just picks it up can like basically own with it. And if you get like your ship fully disabled, the gunner has to earn it. I think if it does, it's good game. If they have to do that, then it's good game design, I think.
It's a tricky balance, that's for sure. It's even with those changes, even with good gunners, it's also because with the increased projectile speed, you could still see people coming back later and going, oh well, increased projectile speed. Oh, burst too much spread, and you'll see, say in pubs, you'll see heavy clip become a more common ammo for the Hwacha again.
Also, like the
In pubs
idea of
specifically, though.
rebuilding components quicker rather than disabling slower, because when you slow down the disables, you will eventually reach a point where it takes too long or it's too difficult to disable a component.
Right, and
people
then it's
just
just
take
more
out more than
effective to
again, yeah.
kill. If we were to entertain this kind of change,
some
I
of
would
that same
also
problem.
I would
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
also err on the side of we fix the rebuild time. Sort of what Sean was saying, where you want to reward the gunner for making those disables, whether it's with the current Hwacha balance or making it harder to get those disables in. But it should feel good, right? We don't want to take that away from players. Disable should have a place in the overall strategy.
Oh yeah.
But then on the opposite end of the equation is we should also reward getting to components and being able to repair them quickly to get back online. So I think what it sounds like a large problem is that if we're talking about within like the Hwacha's reload speed, if guns are not being rebuilt fast enough to counteract that. So I think what we need to look at is, can I get a couple of guns operational? Can I get my engines operational before that Hwacha reloads again for another volley? And I think if we can close that gap, and it's like, if I can make just that like small maneuver to get out of arc, or if I can repair that one gun and throw some damage back, maybe that's the difference that we need to look for.
Yeah, right now I know every time that when a gun is almost rebuilt, like just when you rebuild it, the Hwacha has just finished reloading, and so it's very
I
close
think
together.
I think gunner stamina is a big part of that problem, where they just use it for reloading. People gonna just use it for reloading sometimes to reduce the window. Because I know for a fact that before stamina, if you were an engineer with a mount spanner, let's say, standing right next to your light gun on a metamidian, and you got one shot, you could repair your gun and still shoot for like at least a couple of seconds before it came out again. So, but now you can't do that because usually they're like stamina reloading it, and then they just
Yeah.
reload again and they get even more stamina to do the same thing again with.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
an ugly feedback loop there.
And an important thing to notice, you can just choose not to rebuild the component and wait for that one Havacha, but the Havacha gunner could wait at the same time. Like he
Yeah.
sees the gun is not rebuild, I'm just gonna wait.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah,
scary
I-
game to play right there.
I mean, I think that Yomi aspect is very cool. It's what you see in fighting games a lot. It's like, oh, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Are you going to do this? We're going to do that. I think that's
Yeah.
great to have.
Counter.
But you know, since we mentioned stamina, another angle to take it, it's like, well, if the gunner can reload faster, we already have the engineer like running faster on the ship. But that's a very much internal ship only kind of effect. How do we affect that outwardly, external? You know, just to spitball an idea. It's like, oh, maybe
Jump to the ship. External impact. There you go.
maybe not so external. What I was going to say was, hey, maybe you rebuild stuff a little bit faster when you use your engineer stamina. I don't know if that makes sense, but it could be a cool thing to play with. I don't know what that would take.
I mean,
like he
that's-
swings faster, that could make sense. He puts
That
more
sounds
effort into
like-
doing his job
that sounds
instead
like-
of slacking off.
that sounds like playing with fire, which is exactly why it's cool to play with, I think. I don't know what I'd do with it, where I'd go with it. I'd have to see how, like,
Sure, yeah.
what happens when we actually get into it, but I'm not exactly, like, against the idea.
Gungeoneer
I can-
would suddenly become a very interesting counterplay at that point to a enemy Hwacha.
Disable in general. Like there's
Yeah.
also the beautiful Artemis. Everyone loves Artemis.
Hmm.
Everyone.
But yeah, it's. I mean, there are a lot of possibilities, a lot of things we kind of have on the table here. That's all I have personally, unless you guys want to jump in with anything else that you want to talk about.
Just wanted to know the earlier about the magnet. We said that it was more of a broadside ship. No, that there has been a buff to it at some point to increase its forward speed, and I haven't actually played with the magnet yet with those changes. But if it could reposition faster, like it's a prototype, but its guns are angled more forward, so it doesn't need to turn that much to get its guns into arc. It's actually very easy for the magnet to do that compared to other broadside ships in the game. But if it also could reposition faster and better than other ships, it could go from a more sniper ship in the game. It could become a rather strong brawler ship. Like a sort of a big, slow, well, not necessarily slow, but a big, strong brawler.
So
that
what do you
would
mean? Like,
have to run away from or disable at long range before it gets too close. And that's the thing it struggles. Well, that's the thing. It definitely did struggle like at when I played it last time. I just couldn't really engage.
Yeah, and for any of our viewers out there, if you also want to suggest changes, if you also want to make an impact on the game, let us know what you think about where certain ships are within the game. Definitely let us know at feedback@musegames.com, or join the experimental crew where you can jump in and give direct feedback to some of our developers, and they will help you. They will kind of help work with you guys and see exactly what needs changing, what can use some improvement, because we're always willing to listen when it comes to that sort of stuff. So yeah, definitely let us know what you think, and I think that's all I've got. Anything else y'all want to add at this point, Dementio or Mighty Keb?
I'm Daniel.
You're Daniel.
Let's get more different heavy guns.
Oh yeah, sure. I think
I was like,
making-
sure, whatever.
making Nemesis useful might be a start. Like by technically not
It's
technically
being
adding more
buffed
heavy gun, but
right now in Defa.
Yeah.
The changes all over the. If you want those changes, check it out right now.
yeah.
There you go.
You
There's
get
a nice
into
plug.
Defa.
There's a nice plug. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff always going on with the experimental crew, but yeah, I think that's going to do it here for our interview. Thank you so much to everybody who's watching. Thank you so much to Dementio and Mighty Keb for joining us, and congratulations
Daniel.
once again. You're Daniel, yes. Congratulations once again on your win at Sunday Community Skirmish number 200. Also want to give a shout out um, to the Sunday Community Skirmish organizer. That would of course be Delorum. He was the one who helped set this up here today. Also want to thank Eric for joining us here today and bringing his insight from the Muse side of the equation and letting us know how things look on his end. But once again, thank you so much for joining everybody. My name is Lysanya, not Lasagna, signing out. Good day, everybody. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.